to use. This is to have. Do you have anything at your house that is to have, not to use? Anyone? Okay, fine, let's go on. So she puts it under her bed, and then years later, on her deathbed, she calls her daughter in. She says, come, daughter, I have something. I'm about to die. Last breaths. Come, I have something to give you. She pulls the nard from under her bed, and she says, this is nard. I'm giving it to you today. It's not to use. It's to have. It's too precious to use. It's to have. All right? Do you have anything at your house that's to have, not to use? Really, am I the only one? Okay, New Zealanders are cool like that. Okay, cool. So the daughter takes it and puts it under her bed, and then, you want to tell this part? Fine, I'll tell it. So she, on her deathbed, calls her daughter in and says, come, daughter, I'm about to die. Bring me the nard from under the bed. And she, the nard? Really? Yes, this is the day when it gets handed down. Oh, I've been waiting for this moment. And she takes the nard and she looks at it, and her mother says to her, remember, this thing has been in our family for years now. This is an heirloom. And heirlooms are not to use. They're to have, right? And she knows that she receives this incredibly valuable perfume. This is to have, not to use. And so this is the woman who shows up in the room. She didn't go to buy it in the market, unlikely. She likely went home and she reached under her bed and she knew, without a shadow of doubt, this is the day the nard was made for. Today. So she takes it back. And here's how the story goes. I mean, don't you love this stuff? I just love it. She goes to the room. She broke the jar and poured the perfume on his head. Other gospels tell the story a little differently, but this one I love because how awkward. You just walk up to somebody. There you go, Jesus. Yeah. What do you think Jesus is doing? He just sits there quietly and politely and what is she doing? She has a moment with Jesus, and in that moment, she realizes he is not a philosophy. He's not a worldview. He's not a core value. He's not a thing or a list of doctrines, or he's not a church. He's not a neatly organized set of fundamental statements of belief. He is a person that can be known. He can be worshiped, and he can be enthroned. He can be anointed. He can be loved. He can be embraced. He is a person. The center of her faith is the Christ. And she's taken what is most valuable to her and she's given it to him. Why? Because it is what you do when you find Jesus and you have valuable things. So here comes the disciples. I love it. When they start talking, it's always fun because Jesus is going to reply in a way that it's just kind of fun. Some of those present were saying indignantly to one another, "Why this waste of perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor." And they rebuked her harshly. Now, every time I read this, I actually thought, don't you think it's a good argument? I mean, if the thing's worth a ton of money and there's poor people, why would you waste it? Why don't you sell it and give money to the poor? How many of you agree that's a good argument? Oh, you should see your hand. Some of you went, I know that's not the right answer, but I'm going to raise my, because it sounds right, but if lightning can't come through here, sorry. You know what? No, really, it is a great argument. So let's pause there and leave that there for a moment. We'll come back to it. Leave her alone, said Jesus. I didn't do the voice right. What is the right voice at this moment? Leave her alone. Doesn't sound loving enough. Leave her alone. Not harsh enough. Leave her alone. How do you say that and you remain Jesus? I don't know. Leave her alone, said Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor, here's the answer. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them anytime you want. But you will not always have me. She did what she could. She poured perfume on my body beforehand to prepare for my burial. And there's all kinds of stuff here tied to the Jewish ritual of burial and stuff, but we don't have time for that tonight. Another time. When I come back to New Zealand, I'll tell you more about that. I tell you the truth. Wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. Here we are in Papatoi Church in New Zealand, 2,000 years later, telling this story. So Mark was right, the way he recorded this, and Jesus was right. We're telling the story. Now, observations. A few observations. Number one. Remember this one. Number one. Being conservative is a sin. Yes. Are you okay? I'll say it again. Being conservative is a sin. Anything you want to comment about on that, you can email me at sdavies@papsta.co.nz. Being conservative is a sin. I mean, I'm not talking about water. I'm not talking about the environment. I'm not talking, you can be politically conservative, you can do whatever, but this story is demonstrating something about the way we are to live as people and as communities and as church. Being conservative is a sin. In light of everything that Christ has given us, being conservative is a sin. We're not called to conserve anything, are we? The God that has given us everything in history, in creation, at the cross, and in eternity eventually, He's given us all that God can give us. Why would we conserve the things that God has given us for ourselves? It's not to have, it's to use. Everything that God has given us is to use, not to have. And remember, conserving and protecting is what institutions do, not what the people of God do. But our nature is, maybe not yours, but I'll tell you what we're like back home. Or maybe I'll do a test with you. Is there anyone here who has carpeting in your home? Carpeting, or maybe you grew up with carpeting, or maybe, let's talk about this, the safe way. Let's back up. Let's talk about confession the safe way. Let's confess the safe way, the way Christians do it. This is how we do it. I have a friend who has carpeting at home. Anyone? Do you have friends who have plastic covers on their carpeting at home? Anyone? Yeah, well, I have a friend who, some of you are like, I grew up with plastic sidewalks on the carpeting in my house. And now, in hindsight, I wonder what for? So that the carpet underneath the sidewalk remains perfect, while the little side sections get worn. And when you replace the carpet, the middle is perfect. What? Why do we do that? Is there anyone here who has, I have a friend who has car seat covers on their car. No one. They don't do that here in New Zealand. That's fantastic. The confessions are like, anyone see that? I saw you, man. God saw you. Jesus saw you. It's okay. Yeah, so here's a question about the car seat thing. Don't be offended, but here's a question. Why? So that when the car has run its course, and it's taken to what we call junkyards, I don't know what you call it. It goes to the junkyard with perfect seats. Yeah, go ahead and crush it. But, do it. Perfect seats. I kept the seats perfect. I grew up with furniture in my house that was to have, not to use. Never sit on it. Never touch it. That's the furniture to have. I remember the day that we used the dining room. It had been in my house for like 15 years. My mom said, today we're using the dining room. We're like, it's to have. have, not to use. And then she broke out the china that you use once a year. Do you have china you use once a year? Do you? See, at home, at my house where I live, this stays here, right? We have IKEA china. You don't know what IKEA is, do you? Cheap stuff manufactured in mass, $1 a plate. We have that stuff we use every day, and then we have the china that came from Shelly's grandmother, and we use that once a year. And I'm not allowed to touch it because I don't know how to touch it, how to handle it. It's fragile, and she don't stack it, lay it out flat. It's to have, it's not to use. And we do this because it's our nature. Because of our nature, we have a tendency to do this with our faith, with what God has given us with. It is our instinct to protect and to conserve. It is. Number one, being conservative is a sin. God did not call us to conserve anything. He's called us to give prodigally like God has given us in history, at creation, at the cross, and His Son. In eternity, God gives and gives and gives. Why would we hog things, is how we say it back home. Don't hog. We have to give. Here's the second observation. This woman, she believes. She's had such an experience with Jesus. Sometime in her interaction with Him, she has been so overtaken by His irresistible beauty and unfathomable love. She's now finding her joy in serving Him. Her heart has been enraptured by Him. Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever had a moment when you knew, Jesus, have it all? Like a moment when you realized who you are, Jesus. Then if that's who you are, would you please take it all? Take my belongings, my work, my vocation, my family, my life, my church, my ministry. Take it all. And all that I give you can't say it enough how I love you, how much you are to me, Jesus. She's had that moment. And here's what happens with the comment that those who are criticizing her. They say, well, it could have been sold for as a year's wage, even to the poor. Here's the point of it. The point is that if she's willing to give this to Jesus, if the condition of her heart is such that she's willing to just hand this over to Him or anoint Him with it, then what Jesus is saying is she'll have no problem in the future giving everything to me. If there's anything that we have in our life or in our work or in our church or in our ministry that is to have, not to use, that reveals the condition of our heart towards Jesus. She has proven, I will give you anything, Jesus. And because she's willing to do that, she'll have no problem giving it all to the poor. Why? Because, as Jesus said, if you've given it to them, you've given it to me. So what does this have to do with church? Well, it has to do everything with church, because how we define church is crucial. Are we a movement or are we an institution? If we're a movement, then we can't protect and conserve. In winter, because we have harsh winters with terrible blizzards where I live. That's not true. I live in Southern California. We have no winters. Our winters are even milder than yours. But in winter, just because, that's the way the cycle of the year, I grow a beard. Some of you are like, well, you must be frightening with a beard. I am kind of frightening. and because, because I refuse to pay money for a suit, because I think that's a sin, I get my suits from the Goodwill. You know what a Goodwill is? Yeah. Shelly's bought me one for funerals and weddings, because she's just, just embarrassed that I would show up to a funeral with a Goodwill suit or a wedding with a Goodwill suit. So I have one suit